Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Joe Pug. He's going to talk about his friendship with Justin Townes Earle.
I should preface it with saying, I guess I was friends with Justin Townes Earle, but to the degree that someone could be friends with Justin Townes Earle. I don't know how intimate. He certainly wasn't intimate in a way that friends are with me in many ways. But I mean, we were close. We did a lot of things together, and then I'd see, 3 months after touring, I'd see like an interview that he gave, and he'd go, my good friend Joe Pug. I'm like, well, if we're good buddies, how come we don't talk on the phone, man? But because I got a lot of buddies, and we hang, we know about each other's lives. So he was, for whatever reason, at least with me, he was a pretty private guy in his own way. Never really, always felt like there was a lot that I never knew about him. And then once he passed away, all that went to the grave with him. I got my start playing music in Chicago, and he would come through town just as his star was starting to rise. He'd come through town and play, and I saw him play a couple of times, like street fests and stuff. And then I finally got a gig in Indianapolis, Otis, of all places, your stomping grounds. I got a gig doing like a songwriter pull at Radio with him. Now this takes on further import and meaning because a major turning point in his life, in my opinion, happened at Radio many years later after the Harlem River Blues record came out. But this is like 3 years before this. So this is like 2008, 9, something like that. And I was still a local singer-songwriter in Chicago, and I somehow got the gig to do a songwriter pull with him. And it was Justin, and it was Josh Headley on violin. And I want to say it was Corey Younts from now of Old Crow. Corey was in the band too. Might be getting this timeline mixed up a little bit, but I'm pretty sure it was both of them on that gig. And Justin was amazing. The first 5 or 6 years of me seeing Justin shows, Justin was always amazing when he played. It was a different thing. And people can listen to the records now, but people who never saw him live, there will always be a divide between the people who saw him live and those who didn't. He was a different animal. He was an amazing performer. So he did this amazing gig at Radio. I played it with him. We kind of met. He was nice enough. And then fast forward, and through luck and happenstance, my life changed because someone passed along my original demo to Steve Earle, his dad. This is completely unrelated. Steve heard this record, and it wasn't a record, man. It was like, a CDR burned onto a thing. And Steve was like, yeah, this is the guy that's going to come open my Townes Van Zandt tour. He did a record called Townes where he covered all of Townes' songs. So Steve took me on tour. I was working for like a demolition company in Chicago, and I basically got to quit my job because it was like, Steve Earle needs you to come on the road for 2 months in the States and a month in Europe. It's like, deal, I'll be there. You know how people always say, people always ask you, they'll go, when will I know to quit my job and just do music? And, the older artist always tells them, you'll know when it's time. And you go, well, that's bullshit. I'm not going to know when it's time. Well, for me, it was really clear. It was like, Steve Earle wants you to go on the road. It was like, yeah, it's time. So I quit. I go on the road with Steve. This is a very long roundabout way for me to get back to Justin, but I go on the road with Steve. Steve takes on kind of like a mentorship role in my life. And Steve then passes along my record to Justin. And Justin, even though he had already met me, it was just kind of in passing. And he passed along this record to Justin that had a song of mine called Hymn 101. And Justin heard that song and really connected with it. He really liked it. And so as soon as I was done with Steve, it was like, hey, do you want to do 10 weeks with Justin in the United States on the back of his record Midnight at the Movies, which in my opinion, it's either that or Harlem River Blues as his high watermark as an artist. So he was doing this tour so we're in the Rumba Cafe here in Columbus, little, let's say 250 capacity club. Justin was playing the rumba cafes of the United States, all over the place, all these little 250 capacity clubs. Maybe in Chicago, it'd be a bigger show. Maybe, I think it was Great American Music Hall in San Fran. But in general, it was little clubs like this. But it was like this really special part in the part of his arc. This happens with an artist just one time, where it's like, they're working, and then something happens with like the zeitgeist of music where people get really interested all of a sudden. And that's right there, right where the hockey stick part of the graphic starts to go up, is right when this tour was. So he puts this tour on sale and the whole thing sells out immediately. The clubs were too small for him to have been playing, but there's nothing to be done. And he was just going to go and play this sold out tour. And we went, and it was amazing, man. Like, he was so good. His band was Bryn Davies on the upright bass, who is an amazing upright bass player and smarter than all other musicians, because I think she quit music. I think, like, last time I talked to her, she's like, man, I'm in Knoxville and I'm like a doctor now or something like that. But Bryn came out of the bluegrass world and was, I think played with Peter Case for years. And I think that's the case. And she could do everything from play, very, sensitive singer-songwriter music to like the full-on kind of rockabilly slap on the double bass type deal. She could sing like a bird. And then Josh Headley was on violin. And so this was like Justin's like power trio, or as me and my friends call it, when someone has a trio that doesn't have drums in it, we call it a powerless trio. But this really was a power trio. I mean, because Bryn was the whole rhythm section. And then you had Josh tearing it up, just an amazing savant-like fiddle player. And then you had Justin at the center of it with these songs that he had written and released, and these ones that he was writing for Harlem River Blues. And it was like this tour de force 75-minute show that people could not believe it when they came to the show, It's like little 250-person clubs where people would be waiting outside an hour beforehand in line to get a good space. That didn't really happen with the old folk show too much, you know what I mean? Like, this was a special time, a special artist and a special time. He was publicly sober at the time. He was supposed to be sober, but I learned at the start of the tour, he had completely fallen off the wagon and he was at least drinking heavily during the tour. But, with your friends that have substance abuse issues, or even if you yourself have them, like those people, like when they're falling off the wagon, where it's going, and it's going to be a bummer of a place eventually. But you'd be lying if you didn't say that, like, there's a period of time where it's really fun. You know what I mean? And I don't know what to make of that. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. You know what I mean? Or maybe it is a bad thing, but there is this period where there's like this honeymoon period. It's probably the seductive part about alcohol and substances. There's this period where it's like, it's everything you thought that being, a nightclub musician was going to be. I mean, it was fun, man. He'd play like these sold out crowds. I'd do my little deal beforehand. He'd play to them. He'd bring down the house. We'd sell a ton of merchandise. We'd be like, flush with cash. You know what I mean? I was getting paid like $100 a day to do demolition for 9 hours a day. And now all of a sudden you're just walking with hundreds of dollars in cash from selling CDs. You know what I mean? And, we'd just go and we'd tear it up afterwards, like we'd put them back all night long, go crash at the same hotel, stay up all night, drinking, carrying on. I mean, it was fun, man. It was really fun. Obviously, he was a very fashion-centric guy, but the way that Justin would always kind of bluster and bluff about things, he'd be like, well, Billy Reed, I always have him make me 2 suits a season. I can hear him say that in my mind, 2 suits a season. Meanwhile, I only saw him wear like 1 suit the entire tour. You know what I mean? Because we were just staying in like Ramadas and Red Roof Inns, and nothing was being dry cleaned. It was still in a van. You know what I mean? Like 2 suits a season. I can hear him saying it in my mind's eye. So he'd do that. He'd be a big spender. I remember one time we were in Australia and he went to buy, and he bought like a $300 bathing suit somewhere because we're at the beach in the West Coast. And then Josh Headley, his fiddle player, Josh went in and bought one too, to like kind of keep up with Justin. And Justin berated him afterwards. He was like, you can't afford that suit, boy. I mean, it was just he was so colorful in that way. It always had to be a time for Justin. It was always like an event. It was never, me, I'm the 40-year-old dude playing nightclubs on the road now, which means I play my gig, I go back to the hotel, I wrap it up for the night, wake up in the morning and, eat my Holiday Inn breakfast. You know what I mean? But this was, for Justin, it was never that. It was never that. It always had to be some kind of time, whether it was the meal, it was, the booze, whether it was, shopping. Many times it'd be like, you'd get a call from him and he'd be like, I'm getting a tattoo today. You want to come see me get tattooed? You know what I mean? Like, no, man, I'm good on that, Justin. I don't need to come see you get tattooed, bro. Yeah. So they're showing up early and they're wanting to meet him. And whereas now that's all been like monetized and commodified now with bands. Like we played last night in Cleveland where there's a small room and there's a big room. We're playing the small room. There's a band playing the big room. And beforehand, the band is doing this very kind of codified like VIP meet and greet thing. Pay $150, meet the band, that type of deal. And I get it. You know what I mean? Because it's hard to make a buck in entertainment and you got to figure out different ways. And the tour bus costs a lot of money. So you got to different ways to make it happen. So no shade on that. That being said, it's hilarious to think back the way that Justin would do it. Because of course, especially at this time, there's people that wanted to meet him before shows. And I'm sure if they had put online like general admission tickets, $25, meet and greet with Justin Townes Earle before the show, $150, they would have had, 50, 60, 70 takers every night. But Justin, they didn't do that at all. Justin would finish sound check and then he would just go smoke cigarettes in front of the building. He would just go smoke and people go, holy shit, it's Justin Townes Earle, and he would just, I'm on the road now and people come up to me a lot afterwards and they want to talk about Justin a lot. And in a way, a lot of people get this moniker put on them, like man of the people, you know what I mean? But like Justin was like really that, you know what I mean? Like there was a really special connection. It's like, all right, maybe it never leveled up to like theaters, maybe it never leveled up to, these huge concert halls or whatever for him. But this group of people that followed his stuff, like there's a level of connection that is very deep. And I think it had to do with that. He was the guy that was writing these beautiful songs, who was going to put on a great concert to 400 or 500 people, and who would be out front asking you for a light before the show and would talk to you before the show, like would talk about the Cubs with someone that he'd never met before for 2.5 hours, talk to, knew all the bouncers as he was leaving the club. Probably for more clandestine reasons as well, to know the bouncers, if you get my drift. But he knew all the bartenders, knew all the, people. It was kind of like an old school thing, man. It's what I imagine like the 40s, 50s, and 60s being like with touring clubs. Like someone come in and they're not just, they're not just like this on their phone for 60 minutes before the show. He'd be up, he'd be around, and he'd be like this, someone want to talk to him, like, I'll talk, what are you up to? What's your story? He's kind of from another era in that way. The first night of the tour, when we got on it, was in San Diego, and I met him before the show, and he was drinking before the show. So it was like, oh, I thought he was sober, but like, okay, interesting. That's what's going on here. And then by the end of the show, he smashed his guitar on stage for some reason. I can't remember why. And it ended, not only did he smash his guitar, but then there was all this drama of like, we couldn't get back to the green room because he was in there and didn't want to see anybody. And like, there was like a security guard, like keeping us out. It was very kind of drama laden. And then at least at that time when I was younger, I was kind of an impressionable person. I would kind of take on the characteristics, not only of people around me, but particularly people around me that I admired in some way. And so we get about 6 weeks into the tour and we played Chicago, and I got completely drunk before the show, and it wasn't a good show because shows aren't good if you get completely drunk before them. And I remember coming off stage and I smashed this guitar. It was a guitar my mother had given me, and I smashed it. And I didn't have time on that tour to reflect on what that meant. You know what I mean? Because the tour kept on going and whatever. But afterwards, I had time to reflect on what that meant. And, it's just, so I admired him so much being on the road with him. But then you can also see, well, that's not, but maybe that's not me, living in that kind of way. And maybe that's not a road I want to go down. And whether you think it's a road that Justin wanted to go down or had to go down, that gets pretty metaphysically deep at that point, You're talking about free will at that point. So I don't know one way or the other. And I don't know. Well, I have my own opinion. You know, I do think that you have the freedom to choose, but not everybody does think that. And well, I chose a different path. And I think it was kind of illustrated there from the start of the tour where I saw this guy that I admired. I saw this kind of like wild side to him, this kind of very, feral was the wrong word. There was like a power to like this wildness, you know what I mean? It was very alive kind of feeling. And I thought that it was the right move to kind of try to like ape that in some way. But, you know, of course it isn't. You gotta walk your own road. But I learned that. Like I said, he was a hard guy to form a relationship, like an intimate relationship. We could form, like if he came down, if he walked into the room right now with you and I, he'd be able to sit here and you, me, and him would have a conversation for 3 hours and it'd be a great time. And you learn some things about him. But like I said, I never found there to be any intimacy within that whatsoever. You know what I mean? Like you and I, before we got on camera tonight, like and I won't go to the details, but we both were kind of sharing war stories about touring in the same place and places that we were both kind of disappointed with. You know, it was like, well, that was a disappointing part of my life. You and I don't know each other well, and yet we're still able to share, like, that's a degree of intimacy there. And that is exactly this sort of intimacy. You wouldn't even get that level from Justin, or at least I wouldn't. So we'd continue to see him off and on throughout the years, but it'd be a lot of like, you get a text for like a phone number that you don't recognize. You'd be like, hey man, this is my new phone now. You know what I mean? You're like, that's cool. Why is it a Phoenix area code? You know what I mean? Like say California, where your wife's from, or like Nashville, but like Phoenix. Okay, fair enough. So he kind of dropped into your life in that way. And of course I followed him, you know, after that, after we toured together, he put out what is probably his most commercially successful album. And I think you could make a good case that it's his best album in general, even artistically, which is Harlem River Blues, which is an amazing record writing wise. But then also you have playing on it, the Jason Isbell, who was Jason Isbell, formerly of Drive By Truckers, who's now doing his solo thing, but was not a huge thing. You know, I mean, at that time, Jason was playing clubs like the one we're at now, like a small club. And it was like, you know, good deal for him to play on Justin's record, you know, and then go do Letterman, you know, with Justin. And I remember, so Jason's manager now, Tracy, was managing Justin at the time. And I remember talking to her after they made the album. I said, how'd the album go? She said, and she wasn't managing Jason Isbell yet. And she said, man, that guy Jason Isbell, he played so well on the album. I said, really? And she said, he played so well. It's the only time in my life I've gone back into an album budget and I've gotten more. She bonused him out on the album just because she thought it sounded so good. You know what I mean? Well, now fast forward and they've, you know, those two have worked together for 10 years and they're, you know, arguably the biggest single act in our little, you know, corner of the music world. But it's funny. So Jason played on that record. It's an amazing, really amazing album. But what happens with that album right after it comes out, I think I'm getting my timeline right. Right after it comes out, or the record's in the can and it's about to come out, well, that's when that club, Radio in Indianapolis, rears its head again. And Justin is in a violent dispute with a nightclub manager there, is arrested for it. At least the allegations at the time were that he physically assaulted a woman, you know what I mean, who was and then Justin afterwards puts out a statement that's like, just so you know, I don't condone violence against women. What's like, whoa, man, okay. You know, that's a little bit of, you know, listen to, you know, do as I say and not as I do. I don't know how it all played out. I wasn't there. I don't know what he did, but I do know that generally you weren't put in the back of a cruiser if there's at least a strong suspicion that you know, a musician did something like that to a nightclub owner. I mean, I've toured around a lot and it's never gotten to that level. So there's no nightclub owner calling anybody for ticky-tack reasons in my experience. And especially not at Radio. I played there. I never had any problems. But that would really be a harbinger of like the decade that was to come for Justin. Last time I talked to him, I was playing a folk festival called Sisters Folk Festival. And Justin was on the bill as well. And Sisters is out in, near Portland. And Robert Ellis was playing in Portland. So I harassed Robert. I'm like, dude, I can get you a hotel room down here. You're off for the next couple of days. Come down, we'll write songs and drink beer and hang out. And he's like, great. So Robert came down. He's just a lovely guy and a lovely hang and a wonderful musician. And so Robert and I were hanging out, and Robert had toured with Justin for a while. He said, hey, Justin's playing. Like, should we go see his set? And we were like, yeah. So we walked down and we watched the end of his set from side stage with Justin's wife and his baby at the time. It was pretty small. His daughter was pretty small. And Justin came off afterwards and was surprised to see the two of us, but happy. He looked to be sober, at the time. I mean, you can tell with your friends who are with that type of stuff. It's like, you can almost tell with their body language walking up to you whether they're good or not. And, Justin was sober at that time. And that was it. We just kind of had I felt very honored to be in that company with those two guys. It's strange. Like I've been telling you, man, it's like in some ways, we definitely weren't close friends. I would say I was a friend, but again, I couldn't tell you how he felt about most things. I don't know. He never really, he was guarded in some ways. You know what I mean? I got a call from his dad, Steve, and Steve, he called me up. He said, hey man, you want to be a part of this? I said, of course. I mean, no question. He didn't have to tell me when the date was. It's like, I'll be there. Whatever it is, man, I'll be there. And he said, do you know what song you want? And this is a tough one because the song I wanted was the first line of the song is, I am my father's son. I've never known when to shut up. You know what I mean? So Mama's Eyes. So it's like this very kind of aggressive song towards his dad. But I'm like, Steve, I want Mama's Eyes. He's like, oh, all right. And so he gave me that song, allowed me to play that. And there was all these, in our world, in our roots music world, there were all these luminaries there to play that, there to honor Justin's life, there to honor Steve too, to help Steve. I think performing is so important and so integral to who Steve is that, processing this event, it was important for there to be some sort of performance aspect to that for Steve. It's who he is. And so people were honoring Justin, we were honoring Steve, and the Dukes were the house band, who are amazing. And I will say one thing that I did get to do is, so 10 or 15 years ago, I got to play the Ryman for an awards thing. And I was so egotistical at that time and full of myself that I assumed when I played there, I was like, well, I'll be back here many times to play the Ryman. This will be a yearly thing for me, I'm sure. Well, fast forward 10 or 15 years, and I hadn't been there since. But so I knew this time, I had learned the Ryman stage doors, everyone knows, goes out to this little alley. And on the other side of the alley, there's all these back doors of these bars, like Tootsie's and everything. And I'd always told myself, if I ever get to play the Ryman again, as soon as I play, I want to go and immediately have a drink in one of these bars. So I got to play. I knew this was my plan. So I played the song to this beautiful sold out crowd of these adorers of Justin. I finished the song. It went well. I didn't screw it up. Steve told me good job. I walked over. I put my guitar in the guitar boat, and without breaking a stride, I put it down, walk out through the stage door. Again, not breaking a stride. Open the door, walk across the alley, open the door to whatever bar, Robert's or Tootsie's, whichever the most adjacent one is. I walk in, and I even had $20 ready to go. I just went in, and I was like, double a Jim Beam, please. And I got to just sit down and have that drink. And it was it really was one of those, if I have to quit show business tomorrow, no one can ever take from me, I got to play. It's you that.